We're just getting people logged in here. I can see their names filing in. Good morning. If you're just joining us, we'll just wait one more minute as we get some attendees logging in here. There we go. We're just getting audio up for folks here. Once again, welcome. I'm just waiting for some more people to file in. I'm watching my attendee screen and having audio uploads. We'll just wait one more minute before we get started. There we go. Okay, there we go. Critical mass here. Okay, good. As people are logging in, I see people joining the webinar. Welcome. I'll just get going here, and as people log in, they can kind of get situated. So welcome to the Introduction to the Defense Innovation Unit webinar from the Defense Alliance. My name is Pat Lawton. I work with the Defense Alliance, and I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items as people are getting logged in and organized. I'm sure you are all well aware over the past 15 months juggling in many, many different video formats and webinar formats. But I just want to remind you that this is going to be in webinar mode. So as an attendee, you will be muted throughout the presentation. And if you have any questions, please feel free to use the chat or the questions bar. Those will be monitored throughout the webinar. I also wanted to let you know that a recording is happening on this webinar and that we will be posting the recording to the Defense Alliance website. All participants will receive an email follow-up with the details on how to access that. Okay, Chip, so I see that people are getting organized and getting in. It's a slow uptake, but here we go. I see the number rising. So I'm going to kick it over to Chip Langen to introduce the Defense Alliance and our speaker.
Thanks, Pat, and good morning, everybody. Welcome to the webinar and this discussion about the Defense Innovation Unit. Just some quick background on us. If you aren't aware of Defense Alliance, we are a SBA-funded regional innovation cluster and a growth accelerator for the SBA, so we're a resource partner nationally. We're really involved in two things principally, and then a third tangentially. We do business development specifically for technology, small businesses that are involved in commercializing products and services, primarily for the defense industry, but not exclusively. We also assist with regional economy efforts. We're engaged with things like the Grand Farm in Fargo, North Dakota, doing ag tech, which actually has defense spin-offs, believe it or not. We're working with an autonomous cluster in the Grand Forks, North Dakota area, clusters in Minnesota and Wisconsin as well. And then tangentially, we do, because we're publicly funded, we don't lobby, but we do advocacy for the national technology base. That's our clever way of getting around that, that little caveat. This is our great looking staff. We're available at any time if you have questions about defense contracting generally, specific questions about things you're engaged in. Please don't hesitate to reach out to our staff through the Defense Alliance website. So we decided recently that we really needed to get some more information out about something called other transaction agreements. You'll also hear OTAs called other transaction authorities. But essentially, the Pentagon several years ago decided to outsource some of its procurement ability to third parties. It's a special contracting mechanism that is semi-competitive, and we'll let Ryan talk a bit about that. So essentially, it's an outsourcing of the procurement power of the DoD and largely focused on late-stage technology and prototyping. It's growing widely in the past 3-4 years. I think it was 14 million in 2019 or something, 16 million in 2020, and it'll be 17 billion plus this fiscal year. So OTAs are a growing part of the defense contracting process, an important part, especially for late stage technologies. And one of the, I believe the original, I'm not sure, Ryan, is DIU, Defense Innovation Unit, which we're talking about today. And there's others like AFWorks, Naval X, SoftWorks. But I think, again, the original invest probably is DIU. So we're pleased to have Ryan Whelan with us today. He's an Industry Innovation Fellow for Cyber for DIU and Senior Director also at Mandiant Threat Intelligence. And I see, Ryan, you've had a pretty impressive past in government and commercial. You've been at PricewaterhouseCoopers, Dark Star Intelligence, which I'm not sure we want to know much more about that. That sounds a little scary. But also a cyber threat analyst at the Defense Security Service. So pretty impressive background. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ryan Whelan from DIU.
Yeah, great. Chip, thanks. I appreciate it. I appreciate the intro. And let me see if I can make sure I effectively share the right presentation here. Okay, I think I got it crossed over okay, Pat, without too much issue. So like Chip said, I guess I'll intro myself briefly and then get into kind of the meat of, I think, why we're here, which is to talk, about DIU, to talk about OTAs, how we do what we do, but also I think how, a little bit about the broader defense innovation ecosystem and, kind of the different tools available, to organizations like yours, in different facets and in different ways. And so I want to make sure we're also kind of bringing attention to understanding there. So me, like Chip said, I've kind of got a diverse background of experience in military, government, and in the commercial sector. I started as an Army Intel officer. I still am an Army Intel officer on the reserve side. So I still play in the reserves and play Army sometimes. Sometimes I'm actually transferring over to DIU's Joint Reserve Unit just to make my life easier. Most of my time in the Army was spent doing information operations and then human type work. So a lot of my work over the last decade or so has been very human intelligence and counterintelligence focused. And then on the civilian side, Dark Star and things like that, we're doing that same kind of human type stuff as a contractor, but started to get into kind of the cyber realm, the cyber domain, and started exploring opportunities there. And then I had the opportunity to go over. I spent some time doing strategic consulting very early in my career before I went to do kind of harder analysis type work, and then kind of went back to strategic consulting. So PwC, I did a lot of strategic transformations, digital transformation type work, organizational change management. How do you implement new technologies in an organization without totally disrupting the workforce and scaring them away, and actually realizing things like tech transition and stuff like that. So that's a lot of what my background is on both the mill side and the civilian side. More recently, so I started as a kind of a senior leader within the threat intel practice at Mandiant back in 2018. I run all their services globally today, specific to threat intel. But they let me go and take kind of civic leave, although I call it half civic leave because it's hard to fully step away when you lead a big organization. To come and do this fellowship with the Defense Innovation Unit I started back in September, and I'll be here through the end of August. So I support in the cyber portfolio, but I also support with their commercial engagement team, and I support with a couple other strategic initiatives, one of which is to improve kind of engagement, understanding, awareness of our mission, of the Defense Innovation mission, across the Midwest, right, where we feel like we've had less engagement than desired over the long term. So I'll speak a little bit about all that as we go forward. But I'm appreciative of Mandiant for letting me come and kind of take the civic leave and take this fellowship opportunity. And I'm appreciative of DIU for figuring out how to make it happen, right? Because they're using a new authority under the DoD CIO's office to actually do the exchange, right? So kind of Mandiant and stuff like that still pays my salary and all that, but they're seconding me to DIU for the year. And I'm happy to answer more questions about that as well, because I think encouraging that kind of exchange, both, I'd ideally like to see defense folks coming into to Mandiant, and we facilitated that in some ways as well. But that kind of exchange, I think, is really helpful from a public-private partnerships perspective. Okay, so I'm sure we'll have questions on a number of those things as we go through, but let me dig in and start by just kind of going through the presentation that we have, talking to you a little bit about DIU. And as we go, I'll talk about how we fit into the broader innovation ecosystem and some of the other things that you see in DoD from an acquisition standpoint. So we did, as Chip mentioned, we started as DIUX back in 2015, right? Kind of the brain trust of Ash Carter and some others in DoD to do more to bring in new and innovative technologies, as well as to shift from, our traditional acquisition model is based around an industrial age acquisition model. We're buying, big systems and massive, systems, tanks, planes, satellites. So there's still a need for that, obviously, but it doesn't really adapt to, software buys. It doesn't really adapt to so much to the rate of technological advancement that we're seeing. And obviously grew out of a need and concern that we were not going to be able to compete with near peer adversaries in that space if we couldn't keep up with that rate of adoption, of technological adoption. So, the mission of DIUX and now of DIU is really to accelerate adoption of commercial technologies with defense application to bring in, that are going to meet key kind of defense mission requirements or advance, needs of the warfighter, but also to kind of give back to the innovation base, right? And to continue to feed capital into those companies that are coming up with these new technologies that are going to allow us to compete globally, right? So it's both, let's strengthen ourselves as a defense enterprise, but let's also fuel, our own kind of economic prosperity nationally, which again just reinforces our ability to compete from a national security perspective. DIUX, when it started closer to, I think the thinking was probably something closer to like an In-Q-Tel, right? Where when DIUX started, they would take capital, they would find promising new technologies, they'd invest that capital in the technologies, and they'd try and help introduce that technology to different defense end users and different defense customers. The problem that model ran into is that we transitioned very little technology, right? The transition rate was under 20%. And so, what Mike Brown has done since taking over a few years ago is shift the model from, hey, let's find technology and then try and push it into the department. And what we've done is, so we still do that tech scouting mission. That's what the commercial engagement team does. But we have a defense engagement team whose job it is really to recruit defense end users, right? And so we're scouting constantly for defense problems that have money against them, ideally are part of programs of record or planned programs, right, that are going to exist long term for those defense end users. And so what we're doing today is, once we have a vetted defense problem, then we're pulling from that kind of pool of companies that we've scouted, matching the handful or the 30 to 50 companies to those problems that we have that we've identified, letting them compete to get a prototype OTA to do with any additional dev work that they need on their commercially offered product to make it applicable to the defense problem, and then transition it into a program of record. So we're looking for defense partners that have money they're ready to invest in day one. So actually the majority of our acquisitions are not done off of DIU dollars, but are done via defense partners who end up MIPRing that money to DIU, and we just facilitate the OTA contracting process. We do have some RDT&E money that we can put towards a problem if, say, we see a high potential opportunity and the defense partner just doesn't have the dollars to seed it up front. But we always want to make sure that they're thinking about transition from day one. And so that's, our mission is not just to prototype new technology. Our mission is to get that technology used and into an enduring solution, into an enduring way, by the warfighters that we're supporting. And so for us, it's not a fully successful project until that transition's happened. Hopefully that's a refreshing thing to hear. I'm sure you guys are like, yeah, well, how often does that happen? And you probably have your, plenty of skepticism around it, as is well deserved, I think, given the history, but we're getting better. And I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go through. I already kind of talked about this slide, right? But at the end of the day, it's about competing. It's about competing with our adversaries. We got to be able to adapt and bring in new technologies, non-traditional vendors, non-traditional solutions faster if we're gonna keep up. The other, why commercial solutions is a question that we get sometime. And I think it, on the left-hand side here is pretty self-explanatory, right? If you go back to the 50s and the 60s, the vast majority of R&D money was coming out of the US government, right? It was coming out of programs that were funded by different government agencies, of which obviously DoD was a major player, but there were others. And a lot of the innovation that was taking place in that time period for those kind of three to 4 decades was largely government focused. Today, that is radically changed, and it's radically changed in a relatively short span of time. But if we want to get this right, we got to rely on, nothing drives innovation better than, capital that can fund it, that can fuel its ability to bring in new tech. And so, the reason we look at commercial solutions, and like Chip said earlier, DIU's kind of place in the innovation value chain, so to speak, is looking at more mature technologies that exist, that have a commercial customer base, and that are in use today. That's where, for the most part, DIU is looking. There's some exceptions to that I'll talk about, but there are other players in the innovation ecosystem, like National Security Innovation Network, like National Security Innovation Capital, like the labs, like some of those software factories Chip also referred to, that do play and do invest in earlier stage technologies. And so some of this is about getting the roles and responsibilities right. I would characterize most of what we do as looking at growth stage companies that have commercially validated tech. We use the fact that they have an existing commercial customer base as a proof point to the validity of the technology. If they have commercial users on that technology and using it, obviously it's not vaporware. There's something real there, and there's something viable there. So from a viability perspective, it's important to us. And so that's, but obviously we're able to harness then the power of commercial innovation capital to bring in solutions in this manner. And so that's kind of why we're operating and looking specifically at commercial technologies, or at least why the mission specifically references commercial tech. All right, so let me talk a little bit more about the model. And so this slide here talks about that model I characterized up front. And so we have, we're divided, DIU is divided into 6 different portfolios. I'm going to go through those on the next slide. And then we have a commercial engagement team and a defense engagement team. And then obviously we have kind of back office functions and contracting and all that. The defense engagement team is out constantly, right? They've got representatives from all 5 services. We also have kind of L&Os and integrees from other departments and agencies. We just inked an MOU with DHS not too long ago. We do some tight collaboration with DOE. Obviously 2 large innovation budgets there, our R&D budgets there. And then we closely collaborate with a few others. So the defense engagement team is building partnerships with the services, building partnerships with different, with the COCOMs and the major commands. They also build relationships with the program offices that are out there. Part of that is just, again, advocating the DIU mission, because similar to you guys, many of them haven't necessarily heard of DIU. And obviously that's an ongoing process, because because of the natural turnover that comes, with kind of Defense Department type of work. And obviously we have folks move in every 3 years, 2 to 3 years. And so, folks may come in, folks newly enter the ecosystem that just don't know. And, as much as we'd all like to think that transitions are always warm and work really well, that's just, as you guys know, not the case, right? And so, I'm sure many of you have faced situations where you had an advocate, you had a key advocate inside and a potential customer, and then that person leaves, and like suddenly you're back to day one, and you're starting over again to try and rebuild those relationships and things. So as much as possible, we try to make it, we try to institutionalize the relationships, but we're still early in that process. And so the job of the defense engagement team is to build those relationships and to source requirements, really. So what they're doing is understanding the different requirements coming out of the different services, the different end users, teeing those up for our portfolio teams, so the portfolios can get an idea of the types of solutions that are needed. And the commercial engagement team, each portfolio has at least one commercial executive attached to them. Some of them have two. And they're constantly scouting, right? They're out talking to VCs, they're talking to PEs, they're talking to companies, they're doing events like decode events and different kind of pitch events that take place in their kind of broad technological categories. And they're trying to see what types of solutions are out there. They're making aware, they're doing engagements like this, making folks aware of DIU and the fact that we're here, so that people know to watch the website for new solicitations that go out, and that sort of thing. But they're really kind of evangelizing the mission, but also scouting technology in the way that any kind of tech scouting program works. And so what we do then is, once we have kind of a validated, vetted problem, and we think there's sufficient commercial solutions to meet it, and the defense partner has funding to put against it, or we've found a funding solution that splits defense partner dollars and DIU dollars, or however we're working that's when we spin up a project to do to source, to award, and then to prototype and hopefully transition. And I'm going to talk about that whole process in a couple of slides. What I want to do next, though, is talk about just the portfolios that I mentioned. Right, so we've got, obviously there's, innovative technology is a really huge category, right? Technology is touches everything. And so, saying, hey, we do innovation, we look at new technology is not, it doesn't really say much. It doesn't really help us. So the way we try and organize that are still into some broad categories here, right? But we have advanced energy and materials. That's our newest portfolio. Right, that's looking at exactly what it says, right? They're looking at new energy solutions. Think about like high capacity batteries, think about renewables, and then the material side, obviously different types of material science and things like that are going to help translate to either greater efficiency, greater resiliency, greater capacity for load and things like that. So they're focused really in that space on those issues. AI/ML seems like everything these days, right? And so I think a lot of us do, in cyber, for example, we do a lot of cross-portfolio work with that AI/ML, because there's so many solutions out there that touch both, right? That incorporate machine learning in order to deal with the volume of cyber threat alert data that comes in at scale, right? And so you can't interrogate that data without using machine learning solutions. And so we'll do joint projects with them, some of which, if we have time, I'll cover at the end. The autonomy portfolio kind of touches everything autonomy. There's we've done some really good underwater UAS, as well as airborne UAS projects and things like that. They've got I think they have a new transport one out for autonomous transport systems. So there's always interesting stuff going on there. Obviously a huge kind of category, and one that has many more commercial solutions today, obviously, than it even did 5, definitely 10 years ago. On the cyber front, I mean, you guys know cyber. I'd say it's not just the security side, but it tends to focus on the defense and security aspect more than anything else. We don't do much when it comes to like business process efficiency or stuff like that. Not that we couldn't, but the demand signal tends to be around more on, hey, how do I structure defense? How do I structure our security posture is what we see most in the way of demand there. Human systems is pretty much anything that involves interface between kind of humans and technology. So a lot of our medical stuff falls in here. They've also got kind of a new transport one out, looking at like the controls and things like that on the transport side. So Human Systems deals with a lot of the connectivity there, and then the space portfolio. And so that, obviously, so space is one. It's mostly space. We may see it in a couple other categories, but space is one where we will have some earlier stage kind of entrance, and that tends to be because if you're going to test anything that's going to fly in space, it costs a lot of money to get it up there and test it. And so we just found that in order to find the right types of solutions there, we had to go a little bit earlier stage to technology that may exist, but it may not be fully commercially validated yet because the companies, couldn't get, hadn't yet raised the capital. The capital they had raised had gone to R&D to get the tech built, but they hadn't raised the capital to get it into space. They hadn't necessarily had the clearances to get it into space. And so we can help facilitate some of that stuff to fly it. But both some really interesting projects there to augment current technologies flying in space, but that are obviously dated and don't have the integration capabilities that we need with new technologies that are being put up there, new launch capabilities. Think there's a really interesting project going on there around kinetic launch, where we could actually launch things into space without the need for any rocket fuel. You just fling them into space, which I think is about the coolest thing that I've heard in a long time. I hope I can go see that facility at some time. But so some really interesting projects there as well on the space side. So those are the portfolios, and then like I mentioned, we've got that defense engagement team, and that a commercial engagement team as well. So let me talk about now a little bit more about the process. So like I said, the problem curation piece is talking to those defense end users, and it's talking to and understanding what kind of solutions are out there in the commercial market. And so that's really what you're looking at in the first couple steps of the CSO process. The CSO process, we call it the CSO process. It's commercial solutions opening. This is kind of DIU's DIU specific process that we've designed to leverage OTAs. All the awards that we do are OTAs. All of them, our initial awards are competed. So this is a competitive process, the CSO is. The initial award is a prototype OTA with the intent of taking that commercially existent technology and moving it to a point where it is fully functional for the defense end user who's investing, right? That's what the prototype period is for. At the end of the prototype, so long as all kind of delivery milestones are met during the prototype period, that defense end user can transition to a production OTA with no additional competition. So all the competition takes place up front for the prototype. Once you perform out of the prototype, you can transition to production without any additional competition. That production OTA can look a lot more like a traditional FAR-based contract, where you're talking about like a base plus 5 years. You can do high ceiling contracts where any defense organization can purchase off that one vehicle. So that's why that's the win for companies. Not yet. Yes, the prototype helps in that it advances the technology, but the real win is in that transition where now you get a high dollar contract and you essentially open a contract vehicle to any and all defense organizations, potentially any and all USG organizations to do it. DIU doesn't have to be the only organization that uses this process. Theoretically, anybody that has OTA authority can use this. But what we've seen, and Chip kind of mentioned it over the last 5 years since OTAs really came about, is that the adoption of OTAs has just been slow, and that's because that's just because of education and understanding of how to use them, how to leverage them, right? People's education, most of our contract education was in the traditional processes, and so naturally the adoption of a new process that frankly didn't really come with much process. Like I said, it came with authority, but it didn't come with process. So that's why DIU built this out. And other organizations, other agencies, while they have OTA capability, OTA authority, they may or may not have a baked process for how they use it. And so some may, they may be able to facilitate prototype awards, but the transition piece and thinking isn't there. They may just not use OTAs because their contract shop doesn't know how to, right? And so part of what DIU is trying to do as well is, like, we'd love to see major defense organizations adopt this process as a means of increasing their own contracting flexibility, their own contracting agility over time, right? So that's kind of we've seen, for example, Cybercom start to pick this up and do this more often, which is really encouraging to us. So hopefully we'll see more of that. So what happens after the defense, the problem curation phase, and once we know there's sufficient solutions out there, is we basically we issue a commercial solutions opening. This is a we have an area of interest statement, an AOI, that's usually 2 to 3 pages long. It's a relatively broad problem statement that just characterizes the problem, so no 60-page RFP, right? It's a really simple statement characterization of the problem that is looking for solutions to that problem. We only post them on the DIU website. You can sign up to get alerts on there. And if we've talked to the companies about the specific problem, we also try, work hard to kind of do outreach and alert those companies to the fact that there is a new solution opening out there. We do things like post on LinkedIn and that, but that's about all the marketing we do. So if you want to chase a DIU opportunity, you really got to watch the website and or try and stay engaged with the relevant portfolio. But so we post those there, right? Then the way that the the competition process works is, so the initial response to the CSO is a really sense like a 5-page white paper or 15 slide deck that characterizes your solution. We're looking for things like, hey, how relevant is it to the AOI, right? So does it speak to the problem? Does it look technically viable, right? Are the right kind of building blocks of the technical solution there, that it addresses all the key kind of requirement dynamics that are outlined in that CSO? Is it commercially viable? Do you have commercial customers buying it? What does that look like? Is the company a viable company, right? Does it look like it's financially solvent? Is the company's entire revenue base based on a single contract or a single customer? Right, those sorts of things, because we obviously don't want to award and then have the company, go underwater while it's in the prototype process or something like that. That wouldn't help anybody and would result in wasted dollars. So those are kind of the big things that we're evaluating during the initial review. We hand select a selection of those companies. We down select a selection of those companies to a second round of evaluations, which are in-person pitches, or we do those all virtually now. But those are basically in-person pitches where you have a chance to basically come in and expand on your solution. We try and give, when we invite folks to those in-person pitches, we add questions, for them based on what we read and saw in their characterization of their solution. And then we also want at that point an initial concept of theirs for like, hey, what would a prototype schedule look like based on what you've seen in the CSO? And what do you think a general ROM is going to be in order to to meet the requirements that you've set in the CSO? Because we obviously have kind of budget constraints and things like that, so we at least want to make sure we're in the right space. And so that's the first round is just the straight responses to the initial CSO posting. That posting closes. We do those initial evaluations. We down select, and the second round is the in-person pitches. And then we essentially select from those in-person pitches and then there is a third round. But the third round is actually joint SAO negotiations. So we do all our SAO development and SAO negotiations, where we have, what does the prototype SAO look like? What are the milestones we're going to agree to? What are the key components that we're going to make sure that we test and evaluate during that prototype period? What are the success criteria, the evaluation criteria? We do that all jointly between the defense end user and the vendor, right? So as opposed to traditional RFP processes where you may have an end user and then you've got a contract shop in between that may or may not understand the actual problem that they're contracting for, and then a vendor, and that process is very closed between solution award, right? Try and make it open. I know traditionally they try and make it open beforehand, but once it starts, that's closed. There's not much engagement. We've kind of flipped that on its head, and we try and do that whole the last round. Once you're down selected kind of from the second round to the third round, you're essentially selected. It's just we're moving into that joint SAO development and then making sure that we, the ROM and the schedule, we're all on the same page there. So we're basically in final negotiations in that regard. And we also take care of terms and conditions during that time as well. At the end of that third round is when we do the prototype award. And so we'll award the prototype OTA. They're usually 12-month awards, but they can be any length of time. We probably wouldn't do one more than 18 months, maybe 24. But if you're getting beyond that, you're defeating the purpose of the prototype award, right? So we will definitely do 6-month awards. We'll do 12-month awards, but we try to keep it to that because we really want to drive new technology adoption. Extending it out 18, 24, 36 months doesn't really meet that mission requirement. So we do the prototype award, company performs, we do regular check-ins, all the standard type of process work. And then we help facilitate with the defense end user. So at this point, once we get to transition, right, we're pushing that contracting shop in the defense end users organization to be ready for transition, be ready for adoption. We essentially assume the vendors are going to meet their milestones under the prototype, and we want them thinking about transition, like I said. And so we work with that contract shop to get them set up for transition. We make sure we capture all the competitive documentation that was submitted in the prototype OTA, and we transfer that over to the contract shop at the defense end user so they can capture all that and be ready to do a production OTA award. We also make sure that we're thinking about contract dynamics, things like security clearances. Do we need to sponsor those on there? Do we need to, do we have all the defense kind of end user organizations that may need to purchase off this considered, right? Or there may be, we may need to include things like unfunded pieces in there and stuff like that at least open up that OTA to be leveraged for some of those use cases. So that's kind of how that process works. And obviously then for us, once projects are transitioned, that's what I define as success. Pat, I saw you dropped a question in as, does the DoD use GSA COTS offerings? So yes, DoD can procure, DoD can procure off of GSA, but from a DIU perspective, if you're listed in GSA, you already have an avenue into, if your solution is listed in GSA, you already have an avenue into DoD. You probably don't need DIU to facilitate that for you, right? Keep in mind, DIU is looking at our mission as how do we bring in non-traditional vendors, or how do we bring in new technologies from what may be traditional vendors, but that haven't gotten, they haven't gotten the pickup in DoD yet, right? So I saw, like, for example, Northrop's on the call here, right? Northrop Grumman can certainly submit solutions to DIU. If it's a solution that's already in broad adoption across DoD, though, we're probably not going to award it via DIU contract because you already have means to get into to sell that specific technological solution to DoD. If it's a new solution, though, that maybe you're using commercially, you've seen some pickup, and that doesn't mean you can't, maybe you're talking to DoD about it in different places, but you haven't seen adoption, you don't have contract vehicles in place yet that can pull that in. Now DIU becomes an option for that new piece of technology, right? So, and that's true for everyone, even for smalls and things like, we have got some small businesses, for example, that'll come to us and their whole solution is baked like specific for SOCOM, or it's baked specific for a defense end user, probably because they came out of that organization or something like that. We're less, not that we won't consider those solutions, we certainly will. But if you're already, heavily working an avenue into an organization and that looks like it's going to materialize for your company, DIU is probably not the best bet. If you have a sole source opportunity with an organization, you don't want to bring it to DIU, right? As a commercial guy, I'd say go with the sole source opportunity every single time, right? Especially if you think you can work it into a long-term transition program. But DIU is not going to do sole sources. We just, that's not how we've built our process. So I want to make sure that understanding's out there. Hopefully that answers that question. Please feel free to keep the questions coming as we go through. I'll try and monitor the queue and answer them as they pop up. So this slide gets at that piece I mentioned, right? DIU's funding here is relatively limited, but what we're trying to do is mobilize the funding that exists across the broader defense ecosystem, right? And be an avenue for them to work contracts more efficiently, to bring in technology more efficiently. We're asking those defense end users to essentially, put their money where their mouth is, and put some dollars into the investments they're saying they want to make. And so we've, 90% of the awards that we've issued have been from funds from other organizations that just flow through DIU's kind of OTA contracting ability, right? And so that speaks to the partnership we founded there. What is the internal relationship and balance between NSIC and DIU in matching vendors and end users? So that's a great question, and it gets to kind of DIU's role in the broader innovation ecosystem. And I don't think I have a slide yet. I don't have a slide on the on like the whole integration ecosystem, frankly, because I couldn't find a pretty one. All the ones that I found were ugly. So, but what I will tell you is this: so the National Security Innovation Network and now National Security Innovation Capital, which is NSIC, and NSIN, are both reporting organizations to DIU, right? But we have kind of separate and distinct missions, but we all collaborate, right? So NSIC, National Security Innovation Capital, what this question is about, it was I think it was legislated for and established in 2017, but it was not funded until this past year. This is the first year we've had NSIC funds available. I think they get about $15 million. And what NSIC is designed to do is look at very early stage. So I said, right, DIU is focused on later stage, growth stage companies that have commercially existing tech. NSIC is looking at much earlier stage hardware companies that specifically at dual use hardware. But those they may invest in technologies that don't have any customer base yet, right? So they're looking at taking, and the whole point was we've got so much capital flowing towards software investment that hardware investments starting to come from less trusted sources of capital. Think of all the Chinese investment and things like that that's out there that's going to fund different hardware solutions. So the whole kind of reason for existence for NSIC is to create a cleaner source of capital, or a more trusted source of capital to go towards dual use hardware. And so they're looking at earlier stage companies, might be technology, they want hard technology, they want hardware that exists, but it may be just kind of graduating from the lab. And they're going to look at, they have their own kind of contracting mechanism. So they're essentially investing in that technology. They'll try and help connect it to defense end users. That's where they could integrate with DIU to help meet some of those defense end use customers, right? And we also help to connect them to other organizations in the defense ecosystem. But so they're investing earlier stage, and then they're going to kind of try and shop those wares around specific to hardware, right? And so we're looking at where we would pick up is as their portfolio companies start to mature a little bit, as they hopefully get some commercial pickup of that technology. Now we can connect them into, I think their initial investments, so they've made some investments in the autonomy space, some investments in the AI space. And so we can now connect those companies into kind of that pipeline. And as we see new defense problems emerging there, those companies, once they kind of reach the right level of maturity, can start putting in solicitations against those. But they may also be able to go, direct to different defense end user organizations as well, depending on the opportunities available. National Security Innovation Network is also much earlier stage, but they're doing less specific investment in companies and more think kind of acceleration. They run programs to, that have much smaller awards attached, but that innovate or that award kind of creative solutions to new problems that we're seeing. So they host, I think most well known is the Hacking for Defense program that they host, which is basically kind of taking problems that are vetted but don't look like they have a strong set of commercial solutions ready to address them yet, and making those available to anyone and everyone. They'll partner with universities on it. They'll partner, but anybody can kind of come in and participate in these Hacking for Defense cohorts to try and tackle a specific problem and come up with potential solutions to those problems that are vetted. They run university partnership programs where they kind of similarly help vet different types of defense problems there. But those university partnerships, then they are also looking to connect so technologies that may be emerging from those research organizations, and they're trying to connect those and make those more visible to the DoD to start connecting them with defense problems. And so that's kind of, NSIN does that. They also run a program that's kind of like an accelerator, where they enable kind of new founders and new startups that are looking at DoD as a market to just understand how to better, potentially engage and do business with DoD. So, like I said, NSIN, NSIC, both reporting units to DIU, but each of us has kind of our own bespoke role in the ecosystem, and we collaborate to then try and find connective tissue for handoffs and things like that. Hopefully that answers the question. What I'd say there too is obviously we're not the only players in the ecosystem. We're joint, right? But obviously the services each have their own accelerators. We try to collaborate with them closely. There's a number of different kind of defense innovation activities out of pretty much every major command has, some sort of innovation office or tech office. So we look to connect in there as well. All those commands do things like award SBIRs, right? Small Business Innovation and Research, and STTRs. And so there's other R&D dollars available there as well. So SBIR phase ones or smaller dollar awards that look at just kind of fostering new and emergent technology solutions that could be of interest. Phase twos are kind of more vetted problems where it's like, hey, you made it through a phase one, so you can go direct to a phase two. You've made it through an initial phase and you do that. DIU doesn't award SBIRs, but many of the commands do and things. So, if a company comes to us and we're talking to them and it becomes apparent to us that they're not necessarily ready for DIU, or we just don't have we don't have the right problem for them yet, we may, we try and facilitate, if we have an idea of where there may be a need for that technology, we're just not spinning up a project on it, we'll try and connect them over to the right kind of innovation office, the right activity, for that. I'll tell you too, we have conversations with companies all the time where we're like, hey, great and interesting technology, we just don't see a demand for it. Or, here's the challenges that we see for this technology in terms of being a customer of DoD's, right? So not everyone is the right solution for DoD. And we really try and, we try and give that candid feedback as well, because it hopefully in the long term, it helps everybody save time and money. Let's see, I saw another one come in. Could DIU essentially buy a phase 3 source for post, I think that's B, yeah, be a phase 3 source for post SBIR companies. So yeah, so SBIRs don't necessarily result in transition. So we absolutely have had companies that have been through like a SBIR phase 1 and SBIR phase 2, and then their kind of route into DoD was cut off at the end of that SBIR contract. And so in those events, then we would consider those companies as potentials for solutions. And so if it matches a DIU project that we've spun up, absolutely they'll be considered. The only caveat is if you're still under if you're still performing work under an active SBIR phase 2, we aren't going to award because then the DoD would be paying in two places for the same thing. As you guys know, DoD's got policies against that, so which makes sense. So just make sure that those contracts are complete or will be complete by the kind of the intended award time frame. I'm going to skip that because we already talked about that. So what you have here is a map of states and locations where we have received solicitations from, and then those that have also awarded solicitations. So we've obviously got a couple of gaps on there that probably should not be on there, right? I mean, especially like Nebraska and Alabama. We should be getting some vendors in, especially given the defense base down there. Tennessee probably has some affiliated with the different defense organizations. So hopefully we do that. We can see, our goal is to continue to kind of advocate DIU and the mission and to get more uptake from companies and organizations in these places that may just not know about us. And like I said, we do the same thing on the defense side, because there are many defense acquisition folks that don't know about us either. We have office locations now in Mountain View is the main kind of headquarters location out in California. We have a small activity out of Austin. We have a relatively robust activity out of Boston. They're just moving that office to get more downtown, more central now. And then we have some presence in DC. My intent and our intent is probably to establish something a little bit more permanent in the Chicagoland area to cover the broader Midwest. And so we're working through the processes for that now, and we're working through funding and all those requests. So we don't have it today, but we'd like to see that happen because we'd like to kind of fill in the gap in the Midwest that you kind of see emergent on this map. And that's one of the reasons that I was able to connect in, thankfully, with Chip and hopefully talk to this group here. Yeah, so for TRL readiness levels, you're usually looking at the higher tiers of readiness, right? Frankly, ideally like kind of technology that's graduated from the TRL evaluation process that's like in use and in play. But we'd certainly consider some of the higher readiness levels, especially depending on the portfolio that you're going to. Right. So, but I'd say, if you're below a level, I don't know, I'd have to remind myself on exactly where the cutoff would be. But, for space, for example, they're definitely looking at, like, they'd probably consider technologies in some of the mid-range stuff. But for cyber, we're going to be right at the end, or folks that are kind of graduate. You should really be out of the kind of the R&D phase and into commercial application, commercial uptake. So I think that covers that. So one thing to mention that I forgot to mention back on the CSO slide is just the time frame that we look to award in. The time, and actually I'll go back to that briefly because I don't want to forget to mention it. But so how you get, how long is always the question to award and to get to award. And I'm almost done, I promise, and hopefully we'll have at least 10 minutes for questions. But so what we're looking to do is move from solicitation to award in, within the span of 90 to 120 days. We'd like to see that move to 60 to 90 days. We're not quite there in terms of things like legal review and some of the stuff on the contracts side. But we try and issue that solicitation, leave it open for a week to 2 weeks, do our initial evals within a week, make a decision, get out invites, do those kind of second stage evaluations within a month, and then do contracting within a month. And so we're basically, for each step in the process, we're looking at 30 days to try and hit a 90-day mark from solicitation to award. And that has been done in a number of instances. I don't actually have on me our current average, but I think we're actually pretty close to that 120-day mark now. So I think that's important. We're talking about a much faster process, than the kind of traditional FAR-based contracting. And even when delays happen, right? I'm running a project right now that's had a few delays, mainly just because on the defense end user side and feedback from them, as well as some of our contract review side stuff. But those delays are like the order of a couple of weeks, maybe a month, right? But we're not, that's orders of magnitude less than the multi-month delays that you can see on FAR-based contracts for even planned award and stuff. So I think that's also an encouraging. You got to compete, but I think you're competing in a much more agile process, which should cost less time and less energy. All right, so I want to just highlight some of the types of projects that we have. I mentioned cyber. We did, what I'm highlighting here are vendors that have actually gone through the whole process and transitioned their solutions into defense end users. I'm just in interest of time and wanting to get to questions. I'll just highlight the threat intel one. But this was back in 2017. U.S. Cybercom put out a solicitation through us for solutions for open source threat intelligence, specifically looking more at the deep web and an ability to aggregate those and interrogate those data sources efficiently, and ideally layering in certain levels of machine learning capabilities. They awarded that prototype contract to Recorded Future. Recorded Future performed well under the prototype. Cybercom liked the solution and wanted to transition. We were still figuring out that kind of transition process. So I think it took about 18 months to get to the transition. We extended their prototype contract to get them to transition. And it depends. Sometimes those will be no cost extensions. Sometimes those will be costed extensions, depending on what the terms are. But we basically extended the prototype contract to get to transition. They transitioned, I think, back in 2019 is when the announcement came out, to a 5-year, $50 million ceiling contract. So, while I think their initial award was far, far less than that, right? What they got out of it, at the transition point was a 5-year, $50 million ceiling, right? So if you average that out to about 10 million a year to not exceed that ceiling, that's pretty outstanding. Now, that doesn't mean they were pulling in $10 million in revenue each year, right? They had to go out, Cybercom only purchased X amount off of that vehicle. But what it did is now that vehicle is available for anybody else in DoD that wants to purchase Recorded Future off of it, right? And so they could just send money to Cybercom and then they could purchase through that existing production contract that's there, right? You can see here we've got similar stories around underwater vehicles for EOD, Agile software dev, and there's a number of others that probably highlight over time. But I'll leave it there because I know we only have about 5 minutes left, and see if there's any other. I think I've answered the questions as they've come in. So I don't know, Pat, if I've missed any questions or if there's anything else to highlight.
Yeah, I think you're caught up with questions. And I'll just let the participants know as well that if there are any questions that we don't get to, we'll certainly share those with Ryan and have those responses passed back to you. But Chip, maybe if people are thinking about questions to enter in for Ryan here, maybe you could prompt. I'm sure some things came to front of
Yeah, I do have one actually. I'm excited, Ryan, to by the way, see something flung into space as well. That's a great image. So let me know when you hear about that, if you can. A great presentation brings a lot of clarity to not just DIU, but this relatively new process for the Pentagon, right, which is seeking innovation faster. And it's amazing, isn't it, that faster is 90 to 120 days, but we're getting there. So one question I had was, we tell a lot of our companies that are interested in SBIR and other contract vehicles, don't necessarily sit around and wait for the topics to come out and hope that something fits what you do. Kind of the PhD level for some of our companies is they go right to the source, the end user, the soldier in the field, and find out what they need, and then they'll go to the relevant agency and suggest a topic to them. So in that sense, with your problem curation step, is it theoretically possible for a mature company like that that knows needs and problems to come to DIU at that stage one and say, hey, here's something you ought to consider, and we're waiting at the other end in case you do present that?
Yeah, Chip, short answer is absolutely, right? And I would agree with you in that characterization. I know it's not always easy because let's be honest, like the DoD is a beast, right? And so if you're a small company just trying to get it, it takes time, it takes energy. That's why there's a whole cottage industry of folks who are like, hey, pay us and we'll do it for you. And I don't mean that negatively. There's a legitimate need for that, but that's all costs that obviously if you're a startup, you want to be putting those dollars towards, advancing your tech, not, not spending time essentially marketing the DoD. So yeah, the reason that we're trying to be around is to help in that process, right? Somewhat. And so, absolutely there's the opportunity to do that. We, understand too that as I'm sure many folks on here know, oftentimes the defense end users don't have a well-qualified problem thought out, right? They kind of need help getting to the point of like, hey, how exactly should I ask this question? How exactly should I define this requirement that I'm trying to kind of conceptually think through? And so connecting them to industry kind of helps advance that. Ideally, it helps advance that along the lines of, okay, now it's also kind of shaping potentially a solicitation that is maybe a good match for some of those vendors to go to, right? The question we always get asked though is like vendors are like, hey, if I help shape it, or if I help kind of define the problem, is the award going to come to me? And it's like, not with DIU, right? It's still going to be competed. Now, if you've got the best solution in that space, which hopefully you think you do, you should be all about competing it, right? And so, but we've definitely had we've had some vendors connect with the defense end user organization, shape up a solicitation, and then the organization that looked like maybe they'd win at the start wasn't the one that won in the end, and it's just because somebody else kind of came out of the woodwork with a solution that met the defense end user requirement better. And that's at the end of the day, that's the spirit of competition. Hopefully now that company knows more, a little bit more competitively about somebody on their radar. But it got the best solution for DoD. So, that's the way that goes. Yeah.
Yeah, I know, very helpful. And then one other question I had was, as I mentioned in our intro, we get involved a lot with regional economy efforts, cluster work essentially being done in places like Grand Forks and Fargo and Madison and Milwaukee folks that don't normally get recognized by the DoD, right? Would DIU be open to any kind of partnerships in terms of being part of your OTA kind of network, as sourcing place for small companies, to helping you with what DIU is trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think the short answer again is yes, Chip. So from a sourcing perspective and things, I think we're gonna have to figure out what the right. My only caution is I don't want to overpromise. I don't want to overpromise with a relatively limited number of folks that can engage. But I'm going to be out of Chicago. I got my Cubs shirt on right today. I'm going to be out of Chicago, and I plan on getting out and actually doing more of these engagements and things like that in the next over the next year. We'll hopefully have a couple of other folks doing that. I work closely with my ensign counterpart for Great Lakes, and we're actually hoping to kind of harness some of the other manpower from folks like the 75th Innovation Command and some others is actually looking at establishing more of a presence there. So we want to physically get out or virtually get out and engage with those ecosystems. So I think the other thing with that, Chip, is, if there's a new solicitation that comes out or something like that, maybe getting it to you, so you guys can kind of distro that across your network of, hey, here's this new solicitation. That should be a pretty easy thing to do, where we just kind of alert you to when a new solicitation is posted. I did drop the website at the end, just diu.mil. And so for everybody on here, if you want to go to that, if you're interested, you can go there. Most of what I went through is on the website, but you can also sign up for alerts. So when new CSOs are posted, you can get alerts that new CSOs are out there. But yeah, Chip, I think both of those would be great.
No, that's great, and that's good advice, I think, for our members that we'll put out beyond those who attended today, to say, hey, sign up, get the notices, and start paying attention. And we're here to serve you. We're here to serve whatever DIU is trying to do for the national defense effort, and we're all in this together. So thank you for all the great information today. And I didn't realize you were an Army officer. I didn't see that in your bio. So you're not you're hiding that, but thank you for your service. And as a naval officer, I'll just remind you that, hey, nobody's perfect,
Yeah. Hey, no, I'm with you. Yeah. I don't read that good, but
No, fantastic presentation. Thank you on behalf of our membership. Thank you so much. Looking forward to seeing you hopefully out in Chicago for some better weather for you.
That'd be fantastic. Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. And feel free to make my contact information available to folks if they want to reach out. So.
Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate it. Pat, any cleanup for us?
Nope, I think we're good. I have one or two more questions sitting out, and I've just responded to those folks that I'll send them separate follow-ups to respond to their questions.
All right, thanks everybody. Have a great day.